In this session of Buddhism, we're going to discuss more details about Buddhism, the philosophy, the principles, what is the Ashtanga Marga as described by Siddhartha and Buddha, what are the different sects, different groups of Buddhism, what made Buddhism become the largest religion, and also the reasons for the decline of Buddhism in this country. Buddhism, Siddhartha, if you remember, at the age of 29 when he left the household, for 6 years he was actually traveling as a wandering monk. During that period, Allara Kalama and Uddaka Ramputta were actually the gurus of Siddhartha. For 45 years, he was roaming as a wandering monk and wandering teacher. After his salvation, after his enlightenment, Buddha was also the first, and Buddha himself created the first Sangha. That is why the sequence is Buddha, Sangha, Dharma. Siddhartha became Buddha in Bodh Gaya. Then he formed Sangha, which eventually went to UP, Sarnath. And from there, he gave the first sermon, which is the Dhamma. So, Buddha, Sangha, Dhamma. And Buddha died at the age of 80, 483 BC in Kusinagara, Kasia district of Deoria in eastern UP, present day eastern UP. And Siddhartha's death event is generally referred to as Mahaparinirvana. Nirvana is enlightenment. Mahaparinirvana is death. So, the symbols of Buddha's life: his birth, symbolized as lotus or bull; his great departure, galloping horse; enlightenment, nirvana, as Bodhi tree, people tree in Bodh Gaya; first Charman, Dharma Chakra Parivartana, churning of the wheel of law; 8 spoked wheels. These are basically 8 principles which Buddha gave. And Buddha's death, parinirvana or stupa. What are the important doctrines of Buddhism, or what Buddha said? See, Buddha, as I've already told multiple times, he was actually a practical reformer. Buddha tried to solve the problems of the day rather than talking about metaphysics and universe and purpose of life and world and earth and astronomy. None of this. Buddha was a practical reformer. He never got involved into the fruitless controversies about Atma, Paramatma, Brahma. See, Buddha's logic was, you want a salvation, you want nirvana, you have to do it yourself. You may believe in Atma, you may not believe in Atma, it doesn't matter. Buddha tried to solve the worldly problems. For him, karma was the main force that drives samsara. And samsara, according to Buddha, is the continuous cycle of birth and death and birth and death. So, Buddha believed in karma, good results. Single point in Buddha's life, and Buddha never talked about things on which he himself did not have control, like God and all those things. So, the 4 noble truths which I said Buddha said was sorrow, dukkha, dukkha samudaya, the cause of sorrow; dukkha nirodha, one can always prevent sorrow; dukkha nirodhagami pratipada marga, that is the 8-fold path. He suggested people to follow the 8-fold path, which was essential for one to end their sorrows. The 4 noble truths. These 4 noble truths are sometimes also referred to as Arya Satya or Buddha Satya. It is also called Buddha Satya or Buddha Dhamma or Arya Satya, the 4 noble truths. What was the 8-fold path? He gave simple 8 rules: right livelihood, right attitude or right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration, right understanding, right thoughts, right speech, and right conduct. So, thought, conduct, speech, understanding, concentration, thought, conduct, speech, understanding, concentration, focus, effort, living. This was basically Buddha's 8 principles: living, effort, focus, concentration; living, effort, focus, concentration; understanding, thought, speech, conduct. Strictly. Eightfold path. And Buddha said, follow this eightfold path and you will get salvation. At the same time, the central core theory of Buddha's philosophy is Madhyama Marga. Buddhism avoids extremities of anything. No extreme self-indulgence, no extreme self-mortification. Basically, self-mortification means completely giving up everything, tyaga everything, not to get involved into anything. Neither this, nor becoming too intelligent or too indulgent into material things of life. The striving for salvation, according to Buddha, requires the performance of silas or moralities. The next requisite is samadhi, third is prajna. First, people should have moralities, then they need to have concentration and focus, and then they can do insight. Once they keep doing this, moralities, concentration, insight, it's a continuous repetitive cycle. Morality, concentration, insights. Morality, concentration. You keep doing these insights, eventually you will get nirvana. And since this has to be done by individual people themselves, that is why Buddhism is also called Shramana tradition. Neither God can help you in this, neither Deva can help you in this. You believe in God, you still have to do it yourself. You don't believe in God, you still have to do it yourself. That is why Buddhism itself emphasizes on the law of karma. Buddha outright rejected the authority of Vedas. Rejecting the authority of Veda basically means Buddha doesn't believe that Vedas are ultimate truth. So he says Vedas needs to be understood from the perspective. At the same time, historians have called Buddha as an agnostic or agnostic. The reason being, Buddha neither rejects the concept of God, neither accepts the concept of God. In fact, Buddha doesn't discuss the concept of God. So he leaves it totally to his followers. If they want to follow a God, their choice. If they don't want to follow a God, still their choice. Contrary to many other religions, in Buddhism, there is no theory of God. Neither accepts it nor rejects it. Always in prelims, they'll keep asking this. And for Buddha, all things in the world are transient and corollary, means everything is connected. So, for example, if something is happening to you, it was previously connected to something in the past and it is going to be connected to something in the future. And every state in Buddhism is essentially temporary, means happiness is a temporary state. It's eventually going to transform into something else. So Buddhism believes that nothing is permanent. Everything is liable to change, stage after stage. While Buddha was alive only, Buddha created Sangha. If you remember, I told this. Sangha had two types of people. The Bhikshukus or Shramanas, these are the monks. And then the Upasakas. Upasakas are lay worshippers and lay followers. The Bhikshukus are the monks. Bhikshukus are the ones who are organized into a Sangha or a group. Okay, the Bhikshus. The membership of Sangha was open to all persons, male and female above the age of 15, and those who are free from leprosy, consumption, because means alcoholic people, and other infectious diseases, except those who suffer from leprosy, consumption, or from other infectious diseases. Generally, they were permitted to be members of a Buddhist Sangha. Also, persons who were in the service of the king previously, or those who were completely in debt, or those who are categorized as robbers, they were also refused admission into Sangha. Means those in for king servants, those who were debt laden, and those who are also called robbers. These people were generally avoided from being part of Sangha. And as such, remember, Sangha had no caste restrictions, no gender restrictions, no class restrictions. And many Sanghas even had none, women monks. Eventually, slowly, many of these Buddhist Sanghas during by the time of 7th, 8th century, many of these Buddhist Sanghas had become into academic centers or universities. Every Buddhist monk has to be a Shramana. Shramana means self-working. So a monk has to earn his own bread. A monk has to work for himself. A new person who wants to join the Sangha has to shave his head, put a yellow robe. Yellow robe is in Pali, it's also called Pundru. Remember, Buddhism's main language is Pali, Old Prakrit. And every person who wants to be a member of Sangha has to shave his head, wear a yellow robe called Pundru, and take an oath of fidelity to the Three Ratanas, the three principles of Buddhism. And Sangha was generally governed on democratic lines, means majority rule, and was empowered to force discipline by one president, elected member. Sangha Parinayaka. Every Sangha had a chairman called the Sangha Parinayaka. And these Sangha meetings used to form resolutions known as Gnapati by writing their voting details on wooden sticks called salakas. They used to write in wooden sticks and shake them. So whichever stick follows, majority of the stick which follows, that approves the voting. It used to be like this. No assembly was valid unless 10 members or 10 monks were present. This is basically the concept of quorum. Women, no voices. No voices means new members of the Sangha were not entitled to vote, or they wouldn't come under quorum. So only male monks and senior members were permitted to vote. But for becoming a member of Sangha, there was no restrictions. Okay. After Buddha's death, there were 4 meetings happened, known as Buddhist councils. The first Buddhist council happened at Rajagriha, Sattapani cave, under the patronship of Ajatashatru. Chairman was Mahakashyapa. This is where Buddhist doctrines, the books, Vinaya Pitaka started to get written. The second council happened in Vaishali state under the patronship of Kala Ashoka of Shishnagara dynasty, Sabhakami. First split in Buddhism. Theravada in Mahasangika Buddhism. In 250 BC, in Patliputra, greatest Sangha, greatest council, Ashoka's council, happened under Moggalipura, where Buddhism started to spread abroad. I told in the beginning that Ashoka started to spread Buddhism abroad. And in 72 AD, the latest Sangha under Kanishka at Kundalavana in Kashmir, under the chairmanship of Guru Vasumitra and later Ashwaghosha. This is where Buddhism split into Hinayana, Mahayana. Now, these 2 words you hear a lot when you read about Buddhism. Always remember, in Buddhism, there are 2 sects today. In Buddhism, there are 2 groups. Sect basically means, like in Hinduism, we have Vaishnavism, Shaivism, Shaktism, Samarthism, just like that. Hinayana, Mahayana. In Buddhism, a yana means a vehicle. Hinayana lesser vehicle, Mahayana greater vehicle. Now just imagine this like this. Hinayana is a lesser vehicle. It's like a car. If the destination is Nirvana, suppose Nirvana is the destination and you are traveling. Hinayana is a car where only few people can fit. So only few people can reach the destination. That is what Hinayana believes. But Mahayana is like a bus, a large vehicle where more people can accommodate and more people can attain salvation. So Mahayana believes greater number of people can always attain salvation. In fact, everybody can attain salvation. But Hinayana says only few who are worthy can attain salvation. Okay. So here when we say vehicle, we are basically talking about Buddha's teachings. Buddha's teachings are generally seen as, in Hinayana only few people can actually understand the inner meaning of it and only few people are worthy of it. So Hinayana sometimes is also called deficient vehicle or defective vehicle. It believes only in the original teachings of Buddha. They do not believe in idol worship. They only believe in representation of Buddha. Remember that bull, lotus, galloping horse, stupa, those images. Exactly. Theravada is a Hinayana group, doctrine of elders. It is believed that Ashoka patronized Theravada Buddhism, a sort of Hinayana Buddhism, and Pali, the language of the masses during that period, was mainly used by Hinayana scholars and Hinayana followers. Mahayana, on the other side, believes in idol worship of Buddha, generally called deification. Deification means praying Buddha as if Buddha is God. Here, anybody can become Buddha by following the path of Buddha. Such a person who is actually following the path of Buddha as described by Buddha and is on the way to attain salvation or nirvana is called a bodhisattva. A person who is on the path to become the next Buddha by following the path prescribed by Buddha is called a bodhisattva. And in Mahayana, everybody can attain salvation. So Mahayana is very accommodative. China, Japan, Vietnam, Korea, Singapore, Taiwan, the entire Asia, Southeast, many of the nations follow Mahayana Buddhism. Zen Buddhism, Pure Land Buddhism, Tiantai Buddhism, Nichiren, Shingon, Tibetan, Shinto, all of these are Mahayana schools of Buddhism. They believe in Buddha and after Buddha, Bodhisattvas. That people who are going to be the next Buddha. In terms of literature, Buddhist literature is categorized into two types: canonical and non-canonical. This is a word which you will listen a lot. Canonical basically means those books which must be read and must be understood as they are. You are not supposed to reinterpret them. Canonical books are something like Vedas in Hinduism. Main canonical literature of Buddhism is Vinaya Pitaka, Sutta Pitaka, Abhidhamma Pitaka, the three Pitakas. These are written, you are supposed to follow. Remember, all Buddhist literature, canonical, non-canonical, majority of them is written in Pali. Buddhism was actually spread in the language of Pali. Vinaya Pitaka is actually a book which gives rules for monks. Sutta Pitaka talks about teachings. Sutta Pitaka talks about the teachings of Buddha. Vinaya Pitaka talks about the rules for the monks. Abhidhamma Pitaka gives us the details of Buddha's philosophy. The philosophy and the doctrine of Buddha is mentioned in Abhidhamma-pitaka. The Tripitakas must be read as it is. All schools of Buddhism, however, definitely believe that the Tripitakas do not directly represent Buddha's words by himself, because Tripitakas were compiled only after the death of Buddha in the 4 councils from 483 BC to 72 AD. Tripitakas were basically compiled only after the death of Buddha. They were not part of Buddha's discourses themselves. Okay. As that, Vinaya-pitaka, numerous rules for the conduct of order, sanghas. Sutta-pitaka, small and long discussions given by Buddha himself. Abhidhamma-pitaka, which talks about Buddha's philosophy and metaphysics. There are numerous non-canonical books. Non-canonical books are those which are non-religious. Even if they are religious, they are subject to interpretation. In Hinduism, an equivalent of non-canonical book is Ramayana Mahabharata. Milindapano, where Greek king Menander embraced Buddhism under the monk Nagasena. Mahavatsu, which talks about Mahasangika sect of Buddhism. 𝗪𝗏𝗪𝗏, an anonymous biography of Buddha written in the Gatha or old Prakrit language. And 𝗕𝗵𝗯𝗪, which actually dates to approximately 4th century AD. 𝗪𝗏𝗪𝗏, an anonymous biography of Buddha written in old Sanskritized Prakrit, okay, called the Gatha style of Prakrit. And 𝗕𝗵𝗯𝗪, one of the oldest historical records of Sri Lanka. Oldest historical records of Sri Lanka. Okay. Now, how did Buddhism expand and develop? Ashoka is one king who can be given the maximum credit for not only spreading Buddhism but also taking great efforts to spreading Buddhism outside its land of origin. For example, spreading the Buddha Dharma. In fact, Ashoka sent missionaries not only to South India but also to Sri Lanka, Burma and other countries. Ashoka sent his 2 children, Mahendra and Sanghamitra, to Sri Lanka to spread Buddhism. Greeks and Kushanas also embraced Buddhism. For example, Greek king Kanishka took great efforts to develop Mahayana Buddhism. And Ashoka, Hinayana Buddhism. So there were great efforts which were done in spreading Buddhism. Harshavardhana in 7th century CE took great efforts again to spread Buddhism. In fact, Huansang even explained how Harsha patronized Buddhism and even embraced Buddhism. In fact, in approximately 643 AD, Harshavardhana converted to Buddhism after the Battle of Ganjam. So between 200 BC to 700 AD, series of kings, series of monks, series of sanghas, kings, monks, individual monks like Nagarjuna, Upagupta, Upasena, Taranatha, Tibetan monk, and sanghas. All the 3 did great efforts time and again to spread Buddhism, Buddhist philosophy, Buddhist religion and Buddhist beliefs. A quick overview of what are the factors which led to the rise of Buddhism. See, influence of time. Buddhism actually came at a time when people were extremely frustrated with Vedic ritualism. Vedic rules, Vedic structures, Vedic timing. People were just frustrated with it. So Buddhism seemed to be the best solution without deviating too much and not need to following too much of new religion. And Buddhism had very simple doctrines. There was no metaphysics, no talking about gods and atmas and paramatmas. Buddhism was quite understandable. It was firstly explained in Pali, which was actually the language of the common people, because Sanskrit was the language of the elite. Pali was what majority spoke. It was easy to understand. And as a language also, Buddhism kept it quite simple. It never got into metaphysical stuff, more complicated stuff. And Buddha himself as a personality is a great contributor to Buddhism, because I told you he was a practicalist. He only tried to solve those problems which were understandable to the common people and solvable in the first place. So Buddha's logic of not getting into discussions about God and Atma and Paramatma is, these were intangible entities. These were things which can't be actually physically be solved or physically be explained. So Buddhism never got into it, and Buddha never got into it. Buddhism was very inexpensive. No rituals, no temples, no restrictions. And Buddhism as such had no casteism, no classism. Strictly egalitarian. Time and again, Buddha received extensive patronage. Ashoka, Kushanas, Indo-Greeks, Menander, etc. Rudraraman, post-Ashoka kings, Guptas, even Samudragupta, Kumaragupta, who ended up creating Nalanda University, greatest Buddhist university. All the way till 700 AD, including Harsha, everybody supported Buddhism. And then universities like Nalanda, Vikramshila, Somarupa, Odantapuri, all these universities played great centers of learning, not just for Indian monks but also monks across the world. These universities were supported by some of the greatest Buddhist monks and Buddhist sanghas. And the 4 councils which happened, they also helped in the rise of Buddhism. They took the responsibility of compiling Buddhist philosophy into physical books, the Tripitakas. And absence of strong rivals. In fact, the only other religious option to the people who were trying to get away from Vedic rigidity was Jainism. Jainism, compared to Buddhism, was very complicated and equally as rigid as Hinduism of that period, the later Vedic Hinduism. So Buddhism never really had any rival. At the same time, one has to understand that Buddhism eventually declined in India. Primary reasons were, see, many of the Buddhist sanghas by 8th and 9th century had become corrupt, had become institutions of classism, the same classism which Buddhism actually rejected. And bhakti reform in Hinduism actually solved a lot of problems of later Vedic rigidity, and bhakti reform helped in growing Hinduism. So there was no necessity for people to go into Buddhism, because Hinduism also began to embrace the same concept of equality of people. Division among Buddhists was one of the reasons for cause of Buddhism's decline. Mahayana, Hinayana, Theravada, Mahasangika, there were Madhyamika, there were like numerous divisions, subdivisions, subdivisions, there are split, continuously this kept on happening. And the very core of Buddhism was Pali, which was people's language. But by 3rd, 4th century AD, Buddhism was following Sanskrit. Now, Sanskrit is an elitist language. Guptas, Rashtrakutas, Cholas, they all encouraged Brahmanism. After Gupta period, we don't see that many supporters. And to some extent, one school of Brahmanism even made Buddha an avatar of Vishnu. So, because Buddhism itself started to become a subset of Hinduism or Puranic Hinduism, there was no purpose of growing Buddhism anymore. Many of the Hindu preachers like Shankaracharya, Madhavacharya did this. This logic of Buddha worship, creating idols of Buddha and doing puja for idols, it made no sense. And finally, Huna invasions, emergence of Rajputs and Islamic invasions. These Rajputs and Huna invasions declined the political support, and Islamic invasion came with Sufism. Sufism was even more simpler religion than Buddhism. That's the story of Buddhism. We've seen the growth of Buddhism, the creation of Buddhism, the philosophy, the doctrines, the sects, the councils, how Buddhism spread across the world, what are the reasons for the growth of Buddhism, also the causes for the decline of Buddhism. That's it in this session for Buddhism, guys. The first part of heterodox religion. We'll continue in the next session about Jainism. Thank you. Bye-bye.